Welcome to EV Hub Live. EV Hub Live is a live video podcast for public policy professionals working to advance transportation electrification. EV Hub Live is recorded live, so to tune in and ask questions or check the schedule, please visit atlasevhub.com/live. This episode of EV Hub Live brings together Atlas founder Nick Nigro, Deputy National Climate Advisor Ali Zaidi, and Adam Zaidi from NYSERDA to talk about the signing of the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, the proposed Build Back Better legislation, and what these developments mean for the electric vehicle market and for EV-related state programs. This episode is produced by Peter Benzoni and Tom Taylor of Atlas Public Policy.
Thanks, Peter. As always, welcome everybody to EV Hub Live. My name is Nick Nigro, and I'm very excited for this episode to talk about infrastructure. It feels like it's been Infrastructure Week for a long time now, and it's really going to happen now. I'm very happy to be joined by the Deputy National Climate Advisor to President Biden, Ali Zaidi, and then we're going to be joined later in the show by Adam Zaidi from NYSERDA. So, Ali, let's get started. We're seeing EV sales skyrocket in the US this year, reaching more than 5% of light-duty sales in recent months. I'd love to talk about the role of Washington from your perspective in accelerating this progress. And let's start talking about that infrastructure law, the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. President Biden signed the bill just last week. We tracked the funding on EV Hub that go into EVs, and it looks like the funding for this program is actually going to exceed the cumulative investment of state agencies and electric utilities to date. So tell us about what this legislation means for EVs infrastructure from the perspective of the administration.
Well, Nick, it's good to be on, and we are at a real inflection point when it comes to our transportation sector, and electrification is at the heart of that. What the infrastructure bill really, I think, opens up is not only a transformation in the availability of charging infrastructure, and there's $7.5 billion of investment in the infrastructure law for charging, but really more broadly than that, it starts to invigorate the domestic electric vehicle supply chain. There's $3 billion for materials processing. There's $3 billion for battery manufacturing and recycling. There's an investment in the U.S. Geological Survey, which you wouldn't think is critical to moving forward on electric vehicles, but it is, because it helps us understand where the mineral potential is here in the United States. So thing number one is just investment, not only on a charging network that will help us get from coast to coast, but in a supply chain that helps us get from minerals and materials to finished product. That's really important. I think the second thing that's really important is it really unleashes policy making in this space. That $7.5 billion of charging investment, it's for chargers that are going to have to be interoperable, that are going to have to meet certain standards of accessibility to the public. So it's about blowing the doors open to a more accessible, more widely usable charging network. And that means that, the $800 to $1,000 that a family can save if they got an electric vehicle each year in terms of fuel costs, that savings potential is going to be more accessible to more Americans. And that's just so important. So we're excited to be leaning into this opportunity.
Yeah, we actually just worked with a reporter in the Wall Street Journal about that savings number. And, we were trying to help support this methodology for how much money you can save with EV driving without really changing too much behavior. And it's considerable. It's just as you said. So I'm sure that a lot of people are anxious to try to save, especially under the current environment. So let's talk about, the bills in law. There's a policy audience. People want to talk about when are things going to happen at the federal agencies as you go about implementing the law. how soon do you think money is going to start to flow and we're going to see some new charging stations here in the United States?
Yeah, I think thing number one is folks are literally meeting with us already to shape implementation. Just this week, we were talking to manufacturers, we were talking to labor unions, we're talking to charging network operators. We're going to need everybody at the table to inform not only quick implementation, but smart implementation that's going to be catalytic of the sort of investment we want to see. We've seen already private sector bring resources, I think in part primed by the fact that the public investment is going to be at this level, knowing that those things can complement one another. General Motors just in the last month announced, an investment into over 40,000 public charging stations here in North America. So we're excited about that, and I think folks will see in the coming months opportunities to help us shape this program out, and then really get going, putting the steel in the ground. That is the objective, and it's one we're going to get to as quickly as we can.
Yeah, I believe it. There's been just so much pent-up demand to invest in infrastructure with these companies doing the SPACs and all this money flowing into the market. I'm sure it's going to be quite a whirlwind over the next few years in the States. I wish all the DOTs out there a lot of luck as they try to stand up these programs. So a lot of anxious people out there looking to build out the charging equipment. So we got one law on the books, and we've got another one under consideration here in Congress in Washington. Let's talk about Build Back Better, also referred to as the reconciliation bill. Help people understand how this differs, because there's a lot of confusion in the public space about what each law is going to be doing, or what especially if Build Back Better is enacted in its current form. What does it mean for EVs? And what can we expect this to do for the EV market if it ends up getting enacted as it's currently proposed?
Yeah, the infrastructure law is so critical in really creating the backbone environment for electrification to take off. The reconciliation bill comes in on top of that and really helps accelerate the scale up and deployment that we're going to need. And at the heart of that is a set of tax incentives, in particular a consumer tax incentive that would expand the EV tax credit to up to $12,500. Now, folks are probably tracking this. It sort of ramps up based on meeting different criteria. And for me, one of the things that's really exciting is not only the tax incentive for new vehicles, but the tax incentive for used vehicles. If you care about equity and justice outcomes, you want to make this opportunity as widely accessible as possible, and reaching into that used car market and helping families who may only be in the market for used vehicles tap into this opportunity. That's absolutely critical. In addition to that, the scale up incentives include additional financing and support for manufacturing and innovation. We're going to need to bring all of these resources to the table if we're going to chase after the president's executive order and vision for hitting 50% electric vehicles as share of sales in 2030. And look, one of the key elements of the president's theory of the case here is not just to hit 50%, but to hit 50% in a way that spurs domestic innovation manufacturing, that lifts up good paying jobs with good benefits. When the president stood up there to sign the bipartisan infrastructure law, right behind him was the president of the United Auto Workers. So we're going to have to do this in a way that advances multiple policy objectives, and that makes this opportunity even more exciting.
Yeah, we always talk about the importance of strategic positioning for the U.S. here. We on EV Hub we've tracked over $500 billion in announced investments from private companies, mostly automakers, in manufacturing these vehicles. And we have to position ourselves to be a hub for that manufacturing. And it's my understanding that that's a big part of what Build Back Better is about. So speaking of that, your president was in Michigan last week. I believe you got to go along for that trip. Yes.
Yeah.
So tell us about what you learned about this future of EV production in the U.S.
Yeah, I've been fortunate. I actually, when the president visited the Ford plant in Dearborn earlier this year, was able to go with him and then again back to Michigan to see the General Motors facility. A few takeaways.
Well, hold on. Did you get to ride in the car with him when he was doing those?
I did not. I did not. But I am still hearing about the 0 to 60. He seemed to really take to those fantastic vehicles. Here are some of the takeaways. One is, when we say this can create good paying union jobs that sustain the middle class and sustain these communities and grow them, that's absolutely true. We saw that walking through Dearborn, walking through Detroit, meeting workers who are excited. Maybe it's 4 hours more of training, but to shift from a vehicle that is declining in market to a vehicle that is on the front end of an exploding positive exploding market. Number one. Number two is, when we say we can win the whole finish line on electric vehicles, we can bring the supply chain here in the United States, you get some skeptical looks back. And I think that's reasonable given our track record. But when we invest in America, we can do that. And the GM supply chain is an example of this. They're actually sourcing their lithium in brines from geothermal operations in the Salton Sea in California. Earlier this year, actually, the Department of Energy invested in about, I think, 24 university teams around the country that are helping improve this technology of recovering lithium from brines. That's the sort of innovation we need to actually improve the footprint of these vehicles across the board. There are companies, Panasonic's among them, that are actually teamed up with the Department of Energy and the National Lab System to help drive to zero cobalt lithium batteries, make us less reliant on that critical material. That's going to change the game for us. So I think the second thing for me that I took away was, these ideas of domesticating the supply chain, of making it more sustainable. And the infrastructure bill, one of the things I love about that law is that it invests in building out recycling capability and second life uses for batteries. That's not pie in the sky. It's happening literally today in a commercial sense.
Explain why that's important for people, because I don't think that people quite understand the opportunity there with the reuse of the batteries.
Yeah, the opportunity is incredible. So, you think about a few different ways this manifests itself in terms of benefits. First, if you have a very clear off-taker for a second life use for the battery, that de-risks and sort of reduces the upfront cost of the battery, which is obviously still the largest cost driver of the differential between an internal combustion engine and an EV. Second, you've now harnessed that technology to help facilitate the deployment of more renewables onto the grid. So you're using it for frequency regulation or whatever it is. And as a result, when you plug in your car, you're plugging it in to a grid that's going to be greener and cleaner. And then the third piece is you're having to scour the earth for fewer critical materials that are originating and entering into the supply chain. You're recycling and reusing it. So you got three benefits that stack on top of each other that deliver value to consumers, to the grid, and to our environment. That's the sort of thing we need to be chasing after, flat out.
It's a virtuous cycle that just isn't possible with fossil fuels, and so it's a big difference. There's a big difference there.
Big difference.
So, go ahead.
Well, no, look, I think that's it's so easy to think of these things as next generation and future. And in some ways, your mind gets trained to think about that because it can't absorb the fact that these battery costs have come down 80 to 90% since we were at the beginning of the Obama administration talking about the Recovery Act. So the game has changed, and we need to change our ambition level to keep up with that.
For sure. And, that was a wonderful segue to my last question for you. You've been at this game a long time. I've been kind of at it a long time myself. And, back when you started working on climate and energy policy in the Obama-Biden administration, I'd love for you to share some lessons learned. You were there for the Recovery Act, the implementation of that. How can we expect things to be a little different this time?
A few different musings on that, and they all have to do with the possibilities that we have in front of us today that we didn't have before.
Yeah, this is a policy nerd audience. They want to know about the implementation details. Go ahead.
Yeah. Well, first of all, the implementation ecosystem is a lot more muscular today than it was in 2009, 2010.
For real.
The private sector has matured. You've got workers that are trained and ready to do this work. You don't have to sort of pitch into the future workforce. You can get going with it right away. You've got states, and I know you're talking to Adam next from NYSERDA. Before this gig, I was leading climate for the state of New York, and I will tell you, states are ready. They are leading the way. They're going to do a lot of the complementary investment, things like the Make Ready program. I hope Adam talks to you about that. So one, there's just an ability to metabolize these resources in the best way. Two, the technology aperture is just completely changed, right? We are in the fine tuning and finesse stage, and coming down still a fairly steep cost curve. Whereas before we were still, I think, fumbling our way in the early innings. So that's a game changer. That's true.
I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a game changer. That's true in EVs for sure. And then finally, the American people are just in a different place on climate, on clean energy. They've seen the upside to their communities. They've seen the upside to their pocketbooks. They have worked these jobs. They see where the world is going, and they want to be leaders in that transformation, meeting this moment on a changing climate. So folks are fired up, and we are ready to go in the direction that we need to. Things have changed a lot since 2009. In many ways, for the better. We've not batted 1,000 over that period of time. But what we have done is given ourselves this opportunity that we have to seize. And that's what President Biden is all about, seizing the opportunity, chasing the possibilities.
Deputy National Climate Advisor to President Biden, Ali Zaidi, thank you so much for joining us. I know you got to jump.
Thanks, Nick.
Thanks a lot. And let's bring on Adam. Let's get right to it, Adam. Welcome to EV Hub Live. Not sure why we haven't had you on an episode before, but here we are. We can make up for lost time. So let's talk about this new infrastructure law signed by the president last week. What's it mean for EVs in New York?
Yeah, thanks for having me, Nick. I agree it's been too long, but great to be here today. So, investing in EVs is just one of the many steps that we need to take, both as a country and in New York, to meet our climate goals. And it's increasingly important in New York, especially because Governor Kathy Hochul just in September announced that New York was signing a law to require all new passenger car sales to be zero emission by 2035, and all medium and heavy duty vehicles sales to be zero emission by 2045, which is really a game changer and making it extra important to build the right infrastructure for electric vehicles, which are going to make up a large portion of that. Now, we've done a lot of investment in electric vehicles already to date. We've been working with a number of agencies, including mine at NYSERDA over the last few years. We've tripled the number of charging stations in the last 3 years alone to more than 9,000. And we've committed nearly $1 billion to charging infrastructure through the state and utility programs, including what the Make Ready program that Ali mentioned. But we know that we need to go even farther and faster if we are going to meet our climate goals. We have very aggressive goals for 2030 and 2050, and we have seen the same increase in interest in EVs that has been across the country, and we really need to be prepared for that. Not only are we working on light duty vehicles, we're also working on medium and heavy duty vehicle infrastructure and medium and heavy duty vehicles themselves, getting them out there. And we are trying to focus as much as possible on making EVs accessible to all, which I know has been a big focus of the infrastructure bill as well. And we're really excited to be able to work with the Biden administration on that. So, the Biden administration has set this goal of 500,000 EV chargers by 2030. And we are ready and able to make that happen, make our part of that happen in New York, and help us make our communities more sustainable and greener.
So let's talk a little bit about how you're going to make that happen. So the funding in this bill, it's a mix of competitive grants, some formula funding for the state DOT in New York. How do you think NYSERDA is going to try to leverage these new funds to sources and put together your EV programs? Tell us about how you expect that to affect your work.
Well, leveraging is really the key there. And the federal infrastructure bill imagines a lot of leveraging because there are cost share requirements for all of these programs, at least 20%. And so first, I think we're well positioned to use this money to expand the reach of our existing programs, which we may be able to use as cost share for the federal money. We have a number of programs already in place, including the Make Ready program that Ali mentioned, which through utilities supports the installation of EV charging stations where they most benefit the public. And I'll point out that just last week, the Public Service Commission here in New York voted to fully implement that program, which is really exciting. We're also making major investments in charging stations with VW settlement funds and with the New York Power Authority's Evolve New York initiative. And also a part of the Make Ready program was the New York Clean Transportation Prizes, which will award up to $85 million to accelerate the transition to cleaner mobility, especially in disadvantaged communities. So how we're going to go about it, with the formula funding opportunities, typically, as you noted, that's mostly going to be going to state DOTs for most of the electric vehicle sections of this law. Although I guess the school bus is not DOTs. Right. But we'll be working very closely with DOT here. We have a great working relationship with them. They've been a big partner of ours on our truck voucher program for the last 7 or 8 years. And they have a lot of experience administering federal money. And so they know how the ins and outs of this are going to work. That's one of the big unknowns from the state side right now, just what some of the rules are going to be around the funding sources and how they're set up may influence how we approach it. But we'll be bringing in not just DOT, but other agencies and figuring out what the appropriate roles for each state agency is. For the competitive funding opportunities, we'll look at who can apply. That's usually the biggest the biggest thing and the first thing you need to look at. Some of these funding opportunities are only available for state agencies to apply to. Others are open to broader groups. And so if it's only state agencies, then we might be a lead agency on that application. If it's open to anyone, then it might be us, it might be other partners in New York. And
how often is NYSERDA applying for grants like that or at least from the transportation side, from your side? How often are you guys actually having to do stuff like that? Is this going to be new activities for you?
We haven't in a while, but we were a lead applicant for many of the ARA for the Recovery Act projects, and we were successful on some of those. We have received other grants from DOE, from the Clean Cities program over the years. So we have done it, not in a little while, but it's easy enough to get back up to speed there.
Right on. Okay.
But one of the things with the competitive programs that can be tricky for state agencies is that that everyone in New York is going to be asking us for letters of support and to partner with them, and we'll need to have a process because we do have procurement rules and everything, and that's one of the trickier parts of this all.
Yeah, I believe it. I think one of the not focused on enough aspects of this is the partnering of the DOTs and the energy offices around the country, because there's just going to be so much co-dependence, if you will, on like either winning the competitive grants or implementing the formula funding. I mean, you guys are for some states that's going to be breaking new ground. As you mentioned, New York, you guys are probably a little bit ahead of the game compared to others, but it's going to be a big change. I think that for a long time, DOT was kind of limited to just talking about, at least at the federal level, highway corridors, right? Designations and such. Now it's actually building them out. So it's a big transition.
It is. And I think we're fortunate in New York that we have a lot of agencies that have worked in and around this space. And some have specialties in one area or another. NYPA, for instance, works primarily with other public sector entities like municipalities and transit authorities. We tend to do more work with private sector entities. So we have a good ecosystem here that we can be flexible and adapt to what's needed. And we do have experience working both in the public right of way, with DOT and the Thruway Authority, but also in the private sector.
So, talked about infrastructure bill. There's a significant amount of money also in Build Back Better. So let's talk about capacity building, getting ready for this. What sorts of capacity building do state agencies have to do? Kind of building off what I was just talking about there, in order to be ready to administer some of this funding, assuming it comes through.
It's going to be a big challenge. One of the key takeaways that NYSERDA and New York State Department of Environmental Conservation both were at COP26 last week or 2 weeks ago. And one of the big takeaways is that we have to do everything we can to move quickly to minimize the climate impacts, but we need to prioritize our efforts. We're not that big an organization, and we have to invest where we think we can make the greatest advancements in clean transportation. Light sensors went off, because we do have limited resources, and we know that we need to invest with an eye to equity and work in ways that are going to be most effective at achieving our goals. So, a lot of state agencies are putting together teams to dig into the bill and identify the top opportunities, make sure that we're coordinating across the organization if there are opportunities that are cross-sectoral. And that's going to be really important to make sure that we're on target and using resources as wisely as we can. We have been working with our sister agencies for quite a while, as I mentioned earlier. So reactivating some of those opportunities is going to be really important. We've done that with the Volkswagen settlement, and we'll keep doing that going forward. One thing that really does help us, though, I will say, is that we have established programs like for charging stations. So, new funding could potentially be added into those programs, and that's going to make it a lot easier for us to get started up.
Yeah, because you could imagine in some states that you end up amplifying essentially existing programs, not just having to stand up new ones. So you've been at this game a while, just like Ali and myself here. You were administering grants and dealing with the Recovery Act way back when. So do you have any advice for states, how they can effectively come up with good project ideas and managing of these funds so that they ensure that, you know, they're hitting their goals?
One, to start early. You know, a lot of these projects take time to put together. It takes time to work to identify the ideas and figure out who's going to do what, who's going to benefit. And it's, especially for the competitive programs, you know, there's not usually a big window of time from when the solicitation is announced to when they're due. And so the sooner you can start just identifying ideas and figuring out how you're going to go about it, the better off you're going to be. I mentioned earlier that, you know, there are procurement rules that we need to follow that can slow things down, but they're there for a reason. But it is another potential obstacle that we need to be aware of. And, you know, if you do get money, you know, it's important to dedicate the right resources to managing the projects and reporting, and, you know, collecting documentation. That's a key element that we learned from the Recovery Act, that it's always more complicated than you think to meet all the terms of the grants. And these programs are under intense public scrutiny. So having the right documentation, making sure that you've crossed every T and dotted every I is going to be really important, because the possibility of audits is high.
Yeah, I believe that. I'm sure there's going to be a 1,000 eyes on you guys up in New York, but elsewhere as well. So we're nearing the end here. I wonder if you could share a little bit with the audience about what your next steps are at NYSERDA. What do you see other state agencies doing now that the infrastructure law is being implemented?
So, you know, as I said, we're starting to talk to our other sister agencies and develop plans. I'll also give a plug to groups like NASIO, the National Association of State Energy Officials. That is a great resource, and there are similar organizations for other types of departments, but they're a great resource for information about what's coming out of the federal government. They have great connections in Washington, and, you know, we're starting to generate ideas for competitive programs, but most importantly, we're also continuing to do what we've been doing, because, you know, as I said, if we can build off of what our existing programs, build off of the money that we're already spending, that's going to make our programs more compelling if we do want to compete for money. And hopefully this can fit right in to what we're doing and build on that to make New York an even better place for EVs than it already is.
It's going to be an exciting time, man. You know, buckle up, as they say. So I really want to thank you, Adam Reuter from NYSERDA and Deputy National Climate Advisor to President Biden, Ali Zaidi, for joining me on this episode of EV Hub Live. We're going to have you back on the show soon, Adam, to talk about how great these programs are going as you start to implement them in the next year. But in the meantime, we're off for now. Thanks, everyone, for joining. And if you didn't catch us live, you can download us on your favorite podcast app soon enough. Take it easy, everybody. Bye now.
Thank you.